Um, as Bailey kindly introduced me already, I'll forgo the introductions. I need to say that I've been working in this fascinating space of AI and digital for around 15 years now. I hope you find this session interesting, useful, arresting at times maybe, but also strangely comforting. And I think at the start of this conversation, I just want to acknowledge that artificial intelligence conjures up many different things in people's minds. And I want to reassure you that this is not a session about how robots are going to take over the world, but it is a session about how AI already plays a role in a lot of our lives and how you can make the most of that opportunity. So think of this as less Terminator, more Alexa, and a bit of future casting into how AI could be useful to us as humans as AI grows up. Some of the examples will hopefully seem much more ordinary to you than Terminator, and also inspire you to think about how AI can help us as humans in ways that you may not yet have imagined. So here's a quick agenda for this session. We will cover what AI actually is, ask whether we should really care about it, and whether it really matters to most people on the planet. Hopefully, by you being here, you'll have some interest in this already, and we'll look at some of the opportunities, but also some of the challenges, and then consider how we might practically apply it in our local context. And I want to try and do that all in 35 to 40 minutes. So first, a couple of definitions so that we can find the edges of what we're talking about today. What is artificial intelligence? Well, the easiest to understand definition of artificial intelligence is probably this: the ability for a machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. Others have defined it as a constellation of technologies that extend human capabilities by sensing, comprehending, acting, and learning, allowing people to do much more. And for me, the important words to focus on here are the ability to imitate and the ability to extend. And you'll see those words coming through in what we talk about as we go through. Fundamentally, if we break artificial intelligence down into its two parts, we see that it is both artificial, meaning human or man or woman made, and then intelligence, meaning that it's trained by data or experience. So AI works by combining large amounts of data with fast iterative computer processing and intelligent algorithms, allowing software to learn automatically from patterns or features in data. And AI is coming to the forefront again now. It's had quite a few waves before because of the advancement in compute power, the proliferation of data, and the relatively lower cost of data storage, so that now for the first time, human capabilities can be undertaken in software inexpensively and at scale. One final important distinction is between general and narrow AI. General AI is sometimes referred to as artificial general intelligence. This is the Terminator scenario at worst, or highly intelligent droid beings that appear lifelike in a human way without distinction from other humans at best. This is not the kind of AI that we have today, despite what the movies are telling us, that this is the scenario that we should worry about. But narrow intelligence is the kind of AI that we have today. This is the kind of AI that's dedicated to specific tasks. And you'll see that this is where we focus almost all of our conversation. So what are some of the other narrow AI examples that vary in complexity? Well, you might think about searching on the internet, and that's a narrow AI. Even though the challenge seems huge, the specific technology is narrow in its task. Recommendations in your favorite entertainment platform. That's another example of a narrow AI. And finally, perhaps the most complex seeming would be driverless or autonomous cars. They're all examples of what we call narrow AI. So is AI important? Well, perhaps from even those last three examples, you may say, well, I already do some of those things or many of those things today, and you'd be right. In fact, AI isn't so scary when you pack it up into a little puck from Amazon or Google or Apple, sit it on your kitchen counter, and realize that it can answer your questions, tell your kids jokes, make rude noises, answer your doorbell, or find you a hot new recipe, or provide you with news and sports updates. But how does it do those things? How does it choose what answer to give me? How does it know that it's a human and not a giraffe at the door? Why does my neighbor or my friend get recommended a different recipe to me? And why is the news that I get read out different to someone else? Well, the answer to all of that is data. Who is choosing what that data is ingesting, what the machines, the algorithms, the models are being trained on? That's what makes a significant impact. Imagine that Alexa had only been trained to answer some questions, which is in fact true. Have you ever heard her say, I don't know that one? Well, that's just because the data isn't there in the algorithm yet. Would it be fair if your doorbell AI could only recognize white people in the dark, but not those of other ethnicities or darker skin colors? Or what if the recipes it chose for you weren't carefully nutritionally balanced, but just selected for those outlets with the most content online? Or what if the news or your favorite social media platform always told you bad news because that's what they found to be most engaging, but you never heard the good news? All of those things have some element of reality, by the way. So who trains those machines and what it learns from is really important. If you ask Alexa, is Christianity true? It says, I don't have an answer for that. If you ask it, was Jesus raised from the dead? It tells you the story up to his crucifixion, but not that he was raised from the dead 3 days later. But wait, didn't you say trained by humans? And yes, but thankfully also no, not these humans. But the point is simple. There are humans involved in training the machines, making decisions about what data they focus on, learn from, and therefore how they perform in the real world to people like you and me as end consumers. And so one point I'd like to make early on is it's important that we have Christians in these conversations, that we have our content, our values represented in these systems. Let's quickly make this a little bit more real. A recent article from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology covered a research study that has been done around what's commonly called the trolley problem, which goes something like this. You see a runaway trolley speeding down the tracks, about to hit and kill 5 people. You have access to a lever, a switch that could change the direction of the trolley onto a different track where a different person would meet its untimely demise. So should you pull the lever and end 1 life and spare 5? Another company took this same idea to test 9 different comparisons shown to polarized people. Should a self-driving car prioritize humans over pets, passengers over pedestrians, more lives over fewer, women over men, young over old, fit over sickly, higher social status over lower, law abiders over law benders, and finally, should this car swerve at all, or should it stay on its course? The simple example shows us why ethics and values in AI are important. Which data should be prioritized as more important and more prevalent is key. If we train a Ring doorbell to recognize a white person in the dark, it should also be trained to recognize Asian and Black people in the dark. What if the decision wasn't an autonomous vehicle or a doorbell, but an outcome controlling a different kind of decision, say one that provided you financial advice on your pension, or a healthcare recommendation like whether to go and see a doctor about a particular kind of disease, or whether to let a person into the country at the border? So by now, I hope that you've recognized that AI is not only important, but it's also already very prevalent in all of our lives, from spam filters in email to answering your questions in your favorite virtual assistant, or recommending you your entertainment, and in the near future, yes, driving your car. So what are some of the other opportunities? Well, I think the first thing and the main thing to emphasize here is that probably most helpful solutions at the moment are a combination of humans and AI. So that's to say that there are plenty of things that AI is better at than humans, but there's also plenty of scenarios where it's either not yet as good as humans or never will be. So seeing AI as an extension of human capabilities rather than an out-and-out replacement is probably sensible for at least the next decade. And certainly AI is useful when we're dealing with large data sets because of improved compute power and the ability for a machine to synthesize huge data sets in seconds or minutes in ways that would take humans years or even lifetimes. To illustrate, if I asked you what's the best image for a cat on the internet, it's an impossible task for a human without this kind of machine intelligence. But for an AI like Google search, that's possible in milliseconds. In healthcare, you already saw me flash up the example of the ability for an exoskeleton to help a paralyzed man to walk by translating signals from the brain into instructions for controlling the exoskeleton. But there's plenty of other examples, like using computer vision to learn to identify brain tumors in imaging scans. And here the AI can far outperform humans. In a recent study, an AI was able to diagnose correctly in 87% of cases, whereas a specialist human doctor only got the diagnosis right 66% of the time. In marketing, AI can be used for extreme hyper-personalization to give each of your customers a completely unique experience on your sites and apps, or to show you what clothes you should be wearing without actually having to put them on. In customer service, robots are being used in airports to answer questions, restaurants to make and deliver food, and in hotels to deliver room service. In transportation, AI is taking to the roads through driverless cars and delivering packages to our homes through delivery robots, even baking just-in-time pizzas so that they get delivered hot to our front doors. And in security and defense, some nation states are monitoring the behaviors of their citizens every single day and building citizen credit scores. And in many airports around the world, computer vision is used to spot unusual behavior and identify wanted human beings to protect the rest of us. To finish on a slightly lighter note, AI is already being used in art, music, and film to create new royalty-free unique music or short films that are being generated entirely by AI. Even art is being painted by AI. So then, if there are so many perceived benefits and opportunities, what about some of the drawbacks? A lot of press, I think, has focused on AI taking people's jobs. And tactically, there is some truth in that statement. Yes, some lower value, probably less satisfying work could be automated or replaced by some AI intelligent systems. Perhaps even some more intelligent jobs too that take judgment, like driving taxis, but not all that soon. Where I've been involved in these sorts of projects, the reaction is typically more, thank you, that I don't need to do some more of that mundane stuff anymore, and I can focus on some more of my creative, intelligent work where I can really apply some human skills, things that robots don't do so well, such as empathy, creativity, and judgment. And various studies have shown that AI is in fact a net job creator rather than a job killer. But honestly speaking, AI isn't always best. There are plenty of things that AI isn't good at, and we should make sure that we don't apply AI to every problem we have in front of us. The question shouldn't be, AI is the answer, now what's the problem? But rather carefully think about what the skills of AI are that are right for the problem that you have in front of you. What about some of the other challenges? Well, AI is inherently data-based. No, not a database, but based on data. And this is the point I made about training data. The challenge here is making sure that all AI has a representative training data set, which accurately represents the world around us, and not just a bias towards some people. Amazon was forced to scrap an AI hiring tool because it kept choosing white men, because that was the data that it had been trained on, a long history of white men in their past. Women, in fact, were being actively screened out. And transparency in AI is key too. As humans, we all deserve an explanation of why an AI is making a recommendation for us and what that recommendation is based on. Much AI literature is being devoted to explainability. In other words, the ability for a system to provide a non-technical explanation for any outcome. And without this, AI is opaque and can be worrisome. And AI should be there to serve humans and maintain order in the world. Therefore, there's a responsibility to stay human-centric. what is good for humans? Some technical geeks here will know Asimov's law of robotics, one of which is a robot may not injure a human, and another is a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings. Going beyond this would indeed be dangerous and irresponsible. And there are significant challenges with privacy. And whilst there is a lot of regulation now, especially in Europe with GDPR, using your users' data or clients' data without explicit permission for a specific use case is strictly forbidden. So this is something to carefully consider. And in fact, some of the major players, even like Google, have fallen foul of this already, costing them millions. Arguably, one legitimate challenge is getting left behind. Will the haves grow stronger and the have-nots grow weaker? Will we become more polarized as a society? What happens if I don't adopt AI in my life? Luckily, many of you have realized that you're already using AI, but I do anticipate that this divide will grow as AI continues to develop. And finally, fear. Fear of the unknown is a real challenge. When cars were invented, people were scared of them. They would have someone walk in front of them waving a flag because, well, who knows what might happen? And arguably, this is legitimate, most obviously in the space of self-driving cars. But if you take the example of AI being able to identify cancers more effectively than humans, you can see why the argument for humans to be in the loop in AI is so strong at this stage. AI should be seen still as emerging, and having humans in the loop in a lot of AI use cases is still very sensible. So how about practical applications? Are we in the era of replacing our priests and our vicars in church life with robots and AI? Well, there are some attempts at that, although I'm not sure I'm completely convinced yet, but you can see why some people might choose to do it. In lockdown, churches were closed, and so was born a robo-priest, one that can't catch COVID and may be better than nothing. Well, actually, it turns out not really. The Santo robot, or the Catholic robo-priest, was trained on 2,000 years of knowledge about the Catholic faith, but it still struggled to answer some questions. However, if you tell it that you're worried, it will respond by saying something like, "From the Gospel according to Matthew, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough troubles of its own." Pretty simple. But what if that voice did become truly human-like? What if it could simply deliver even just sermons, or lead people in worship, pray for people, all in local languages and accents in a way that could be much more scalable? And now I know this sounds controversial in our Western traditions, where robots are not yet ingrained in our day-to-day lives. But if this was lockdown again, and I offered you a robot to teach your kids their lessons while you work, would that change things? You see, in the Buddhist tradition, a robot has already been designed to look like Kannon, the Buddhist deity of mercy. The $1 million machine is currently only able to read out sermons. However, plans are afoot to give it a machine learning capability that will make it more intelligent in its interactions with worshippers. In Japan, the option to pay a robot to perform a funeral at a much cheaper rate than could be done by a human has already been available for years and is being used. In 2017, closer to home, Germany's Protestant church created a robot called Bless You Too. It gave out pre-programmed blessings to over 10,000 people. What if robots, maybe not like these pictures, but more like software robots in the form of Alexa and Siri, could actually re-engage a generation in conversation about Christianity and faith through AI-enabled platforms? People who are curious about religion might be happy to ask Alexa a question, but never step foot inside a church. These curious minds could have their questions answered instantly on 6.6 billion smartphones around the world. That's 84% of the world's population. No need to wait till Sunday or whenever the next live stream is available. What if someone gets to a point whereby they say, "I believe in God, Alexa, now what do I do?" I'd hope that by then Alexa would know to offer a simple prayer that goes something like, "I'm sorry for all the things I've done. Thank you for dying on a cross for me. Please would you come into my life?" Well, what about some of the other opportunities that might be even more practical or obvious to you? Well, You might think about how it can better serve your customers, your worshippers, attendees, or clients. Can you think of where any of the examples we've covered today might apply in your industry? How could you use some of those technologies in your world to create a better experience for your customers or your clients? Secondly, you might try to automate and simplify. Are there any parts of your organization or value chain that might be better done or done faster or at greater scale by using some kind of AI technology? Which ones could you investigate that would help your organization or your clients or customers to get an efficiency gain? Maybe you could find better signals in the noise of all your data. One of the biggest benefits of AI is its ability to process huge data sets and spot patterns or signals that humans cannot, or they would take a very long time to find. What data does your organization have? Could you use AI to find patterns in that, which would give you an advantage or identify underserved markets? Maybe you want to start more gently and use something like natural language processing to answer some standard questions for clients through the use of chatbots in your app or your site. Maybe you could use AI to reach new audiences online or through some of the platforms that we've talked about by creating new skills for them. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn and the founding board member of PayPal, said, "The future is always sooner and stranger than you think. And while it's difficult to predict exactly where artificial intelligence will take us, it's important to focus some of our best minds on the implications of living with this technology." So can AI make you stronger? Well, I think we've seen that potentially it can, and potentially there are limitations, or at least that there are also factors to be concerned about that mean that if AI is used in the wrong way, it could also make us weaker. But it's worth remembering that from the point where the telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, it took more than 100 years before we got anything as good as the smartphone in 1992 from IBM, which was still pretty rubbish. And even that, and then it took until 2007 when Apple came out with the iPhone and set a new standard. So maybe we should think about AI that way. It was invented back in the 1950s. So maybe it will start to reach good enough or even exceed our expectations in the coming 2 decades and be integrated into all of our lives even more, like our smartphones. So by now, I hope that you will see that you are most likely already an AI adopter. If you use your smartphone, you use AI. If you use Alexa, you use AI. If you like getting recommendations from Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney, you benefit from AI. But there are things going on under the hood that you may not have been aware of. Some of the things we talked about around data and how it's trained. We noted the importance early on of being in the conversation, of Christians being in the conversation around AI. We saw some seemingly mundane and ordinary, as well as some extraordinary ways in which AI is being used today, both for good and potentially, if the boundaries are stretched too far, how this can become a worry. You should have learned about some of the pitfalls and the challenges too around transparency, privacy, being left behind, the gap growing, the divide growing, and the fear that sometimes comes with AI. So my final encouragement to you is stay curious. What could you do next? How could you take this forward? Well, why not use that AI-powered search engine to find yourself some free online AI courses? There are governments like Finland that are encouraging all their citizens to learn at least the basics of AI. Look up Elements of AI. It's a free course you can take. It's free to anybody on the internet. And there's plenty of free resources out there, especially on YouTube, that will teach you the basics in under an hour. Why not type AI and your area of interest or study or work into Google and see what comes up in terms of real life stories and examples and read a bit more? Why not play with AI? You've got a smartphone. It probably has Siri or Alexa or Google or some other voice activated assistant built in as standard. Ask your virtual assistant questions. Find the edges of its knowledge. Ask it questions that you can't answer. Finally, watch an AI film or a TV series that brings AI to life, or find some YouTubes on AI. if you've got a shorter attention span. And actually, I didn't mention test drive an autonomous vehicle. You can book a test drive for Tesla or Volvo or any kind of AV car in lots of different places around the UK. I did it with a Tesla, and it was incredible just to kind of see what its capabilities are and what it can and can't do. So I hope you found this session useful and interesting. And if so, you might start to take one of those next steps this week and maybe start a conversation with someone else about it. If you've got any other questions or you want to ask a question, I'm happy to try and help. And you can find me on LinkedIn or YouTube, where I've also pulled together a playlist for you with various AI talks and learning opportunities from various leading experts and companies on AI that you might find interesting and hopefully take you a little bit further than I could today. So be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid.
Chris, thank you so much for that. I feel as if today's an absolute school day for me because I've learned so much. It was Metaverse this morning and then AI this afternoon. And it's great. It's great to learn so much, and especially with AI. You did touch on a question that I wanted to ask you, but I want you to elaborate. How did you get into AI?
So I've been in digital for, or at that point, I'd been in digital for like 10 years or so. And I always try and look at what's the next wave. And so I saw AI and blockchain, and I thought AI was probably the one that was going to keep me interested more, and was probably had more applications in the short term. And so I chose to study. I went to MIT and studied artificial intelligence. I've always been a lifelong learner, somebody who likes to just kind of Google around and try and find videos or read people's articles and books. So it's something that I've just kind of partly taught myself, and then partly done some formal study around.
That's great, thank you. And what do you see as the trends for AI in the church, especially? I know you touched on robot doing home visits, but what other trends do you see going forward?
Well, I mean, it is fascinating, isn't it? I think there's so many different ways in which we could use AI, whether that's like reaching new groups, new people groups. You've got these real-time translation earbuds now that you can have a conversation with somebody and you could be. So it'd be amazing to think where that could take people in terms of reaching new audiences. I think that will be extraordinary to watch, that kind of real-time machine translation. I do see that there's a conversation this morning around the metaverse and people watching church services in the metaverse and things like that. So I do think AI has got an equally interesting role to play in the future of the church, be that around translation, reaching audiences, targeting. I mean, I think as churches, even we have huge data sets, don't we, about our customers, about our worshippers, about attendance, about what courses they've done, all that kind of, and there's opportunities there for trend spotting, for targeting. So yeah, lots of different ways, I think.
That's great. And I guess for me, I'm thinking as a small business leader with a social enterprise, what advice would you give to small businesses and social enterprises and charities even on integrating AI into their day-to-day business life or even week-to-week life?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of things that you could take advantage of that I think are kind of free, that are out there already. That you don't have to invest tens of thousands or hundreds or even millions of pounds, dollars to get value from, right? So you can start to create skills for some of those platforms in under an hour. You can take courses that are like, 10, 12 pounds online that can teach you these kind of skills. So I would say just kind of press in, take that idea of Googling your industry with AI and maybe start seeing some of the opportunities that are out there. we didn't have a chance to cover like all the different industries that there are. But even in things like farming, where that might not be like the most technologically advanced industry that you immediately think of, but AI is being used there to apply just the right amount of fertilizer, to apply just the right of water, so there's we didn't talk about the back rooms, the dark factories that there are now, where there's factories where there's no humans in them at all, and they realized they could turn out all the lights because robots don't need lights. So it's just kind of opening your mind, I think, as a small business to what's possible, and then building on top of some of those examples.
That's great. Thank you for answering that, Chris. My husband's in tech. So when he was listening to Metaverse, as I was scribbling down, and after the conversation, I was like, wow, flabbergasted. But he was like, oh no, but it's been around for ages. But I think also for like small businesses, for social enterprises, sometimes churches, we're not as connected when it comes to the advancement of technology. So I think it's always great to hear different suggestions and things that we should look out for. And especially, I will be connecting with you on LinkedIn and your YouTube. I'll be watching all those videos. So Chris, could you also give us your LinkedIn details again, just in case someone didn't get a chance to catch them? Could you share your LinkedIn details so that people are able to note them down?
Yeah, just search Christopher Lomas on LinkedIn and I'll come up, both on LinkedIn and YouTube. So pretty simple, I think. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. And I think, so going back to education, so what advice would you give someone who is wanting to get into AI? Like, what is there a specific route they should go down? And what advice would you give them?
I guess it depends a little bit on whether, if you've got some money, and you want to take a structured approach to it, then I think there's lots of great universities out there. There's big, so you could take a very structured course. You could go and take a course over a year or over 6 months. If you've got not that same opportunity and you still want to do it, there's platforms like LinkedIn Learning, there's Coursera, there's other kind of mass online platforms that actually have some really, really great content, that stream content from some of the major universities, and for some reason they've just given that content to them, and they're able to enroll people at a much cheaper rate, or sometimes at zero cost. And if you just want some really small bite-sized stuff, I would suggest going to YouTube, and type in trends in AI, or type in how do I, AI basics, or just check out the list that I've already compiled for you, which is there and has got all those sorts of things on it. Oh, you're on mute, Betty.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Chris, for that very insightful workshop. I will definitely be rewatching this today and later on when we have the opportunity to watch everything. But I'll let you go, and please connect with Chris. Please learn, and even just learn about the trends that are still to come. So thank you.
Great. My pleasure.